Dinosaurs ruled the earth for millions of years, and the Bible never names a single one. The same book that lovingly describes even an ant falls completely silent before the most colossal creatures that ever walked this planet. Why? Why would God leave out of his story the most awe-inspiring creatures he ever made? Think about it for a second. Beneath your feet, at this very moment, lie billions of petrified bones. Remains of animals so immense that an elephant beside them would look like a puppy. They fill the museums, they fill the bedrock of every continent. And yet, when you go page by page through the most read book in history, you don't find a single line that names them. And before you answer too quickly, let me warn you about something. There's a video that millions of people have already watched, one that offers a quick, neat, almost magical answer. A theory that they say explains everything. Today, we're going to look that theory straight in the eye. We're going to see which part is true, which part is exaggeration, and which part simply doesn't hold up. Because there are three honest paths to explain this silence, and the real answer is far more beautiful than the one everyone repeats. I'm not going to promise you absolute certainties. Nobody has them. I'm going to show you what the Hebrew text says, what science says, and what history says, without hiding from you what's disputed. And in the end, you decide. Does that sound fair? Then let's begin where it hurts. I grew up reading Genesis. I read it dozens of times. And always that silence unsettled me, because it isn't just any silence. To understand it, you first have to see how meticulous the Bible is with small animals. This is not a vague text. When it wants to describe an animal, it's precise, almost surgical. Open the book of Job in its final chapters. It's one of the most awe-striking scenes in all of Scripture. God himself is speaking, and a living zoo begins to parade before Job. He asks him if he knows who provides the raven its food when its young cry out to heaven with hunger. He asks if he knows the exact moment the mountain goats give birth among the crags, whether he has counted the months of their pregnancy. He speaks of the wild donkey, which no one can tame, and of how it roams the mountains laughing at the noise of the city. He describes the ostrich, which abandons its eggs in the sand and runs without fear, beating its wings, though it lacks the prudence of other birds. He speaks of the warhorse, which paws the valley, laughs at terror, and charges into battle when the trumpet sounds. And he ends with the hawk and the eagle, which spread their wings toward the south by pure instinct and nest on the highest rock. Details, behaviors, specific traits of each species, and not only in Job. In Proverbs, the wise man pauses on the smallest animal you can imagine. He says, in plain words, "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways, and be wise." The ant. The Bible devotes space to the ant, so explain something to me. If the sacred text has time for the raven, for the mountain goat, for the ostrich, and even for the smallest insect in the field, where are the giants? And I'm not talking about lizards. I'm talking about titans that would make the ground tremble with every step. Argentinosaurus, for example. The estimates vary, but the highest calculations place it at around 70 tons, perhaps more. As long as an entire building lying on the ground, Tyrannosaurus rex, with a jaw capable of crushing bone with a force measured in thousands of kilos. The pteranodon, with wings that stretched nearly 7 meters, gliding over the water like a shadow crossing the sky. The mosasaur, a marine reptile that, according to the fossils, could exceed 10 meters, closing its jaws on whole prey in the open sea. And those are only 3 names from an overwhelming catalogue. Because the kingdom of the giants had a variety that's hard to believe. There were creatures with necks so long they fed from the treetops without lifting their feet off the ground. There were others armored like war chariots, covered in bony plates with clubs of bone at the tip of their tails. Some carried hollow crests on their heads, able to sound notes so deep they traveled across the valley like distant thunder. In the skies, winged reptiles the size of small planes glided, casting their shadow over the land. And through the seas slid predators with serpentine necks and immense fins. It was not a single kind of monster. It was an entire world, a whole empire of flesh and bone that spread across every continent. And we know all of that for one reason: the bones. When one of these animals died beside a river or sank to the bottom of the sea, sometimes the mud covered it quickly before it fully decayed. Over the centuries, minerals seeped into its bones and slowly turned them to stone. That's how a fossil is born, a mold of death transformed into rock, able to cross through time. So many have been unearthed that they fill entire museum basements, and countless more remain buried in mountains and deserts, still unexplored. Stop on that contrast, because it's the very heart of our question. On one side, billions of stone witnesses scattered across the whole earth, screaming that titans were here. On the other, a book that lovingly describes the eagle's nest and the paths of the ant. But about those titans writes not a single word. That distance between what the earth shows and what the text leaves unsaid is precisely what we have to explain. Do you really believe the Bible would pause on an ant but ignore these colossi entirely? That's the discomfort. That's the silence that robbed me of sleep for years. And let me take a 5-second pause, because there's something I want to ask you. If this is your first time on this channel, I'm not asking you for anything yet. Stay, watch, and if a little while from now you feel this is worth your time, then go ahead and give me a like. But if you're already one of the ones who keep coming back, if you're part of this channel's family, then hit the like now, in confidence, without thinking twice. It's not for me. Every like tells the algorithm to put this question in front of more people who grew up with the same doubt buried inside and never dared to say it out loud. Once that's done, let's keep going, because what's coming truly hits hard. Now then, before we go hunting for strange answers, we have to rule out the most obvious and weakest one. Someone will say the Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs because the word dinosaur didn't exist, and that, in part, is true. The term was coined by the British scientist Richard Owen in the year 1842. It's a modern word, joining two Greek roots to say, more or less, terrible lizard. Asking Moses to write the word dinosaur would be like asking him to write the word telephone. It simply didn't exist in his world. But be careful, because here there's a trap. That the word didn't exist doesn't mean the concept didn't exist. The biblical authors didn't need scientific vocabulary to describe something enormous. If they had seen a colossal monster, they would have described it in their own way, just as they described everything else, with their own images and comparisons. So the problem isn't solved by saying the word was missing. The problem is still there, intact. The question isn't why they didn't use the modern term. The question is why they didn't describe the beasts. And here comes the first twist, because maybe, just maybe, they did describe them, only not with the word you were expecting. There's a Hebrew term that almost no one knows. It's written with 4 letters and sounds, more or less like tannin. And it's fascinating. It appears around 14 times in the Old Testament, and it means something like great beast, sea monster, colossal serpent. In English, it's often translated simply as dragon. Now pay attention to where it appears for the first time. In the first chapter of Genesis, in verse 21, during creation itself, the text says that God created the great tannin, the great monsters, the enormous beings of the seas. It doesn't say ordinary fish. It uses a special word, a reserved one, for something beyond all scale. And it reappears at key moments. When Aaron threw down his staff before Pharaoh, it turned into a tannin. In the Psalms, God breaks the heads of the tannin in the waters. The prophet Isaiah announces that the Lord will punish with his sword the tannin that lives in the sea. The prophet Ezekiel compares Pharaoh of Egypt to the great tannin thrashing in his rivers. Again and again, the Bible speaks of enormous, serpentine, monstrous beings that rule the waters and that only God can defeat. So, did we solve the mystery? Does tannin mean dinosaur? And here is where I'm going to ask you for honesty, because it's exactly at this point that the video millions watch takes too big a leap. To say that tannin equals exactly a dinosaur is to go beyond what the text allows. The word describes above all creatures of the sea, monsters of the watery chaos, and in the ancient world it often functioned as a symbol of the untamable power that only the Creator controls. It's not a paleontology file. It's poetic and theological language. The honest thing is to say this: the Bible does have a category for giant, monstrous beings. That category exists, it's in Hebrew, and it's undeniable. But translating it directly as dinosaur, with feathers, claws, and a scientific name, is putting into the text something the text doesn't claim. What we can say is that the silence isn't as absolute as it seemed. There are shadows of something enormous moving between the lines. And those shadows become impossible to ignore when we reach the two most mysterious beasts in all of Scripture. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture the scene. A man named Job has lost everything. His children, his health, his fortune, his peace. He sits on a heap of ashes, scraping the sores on his skin with a piece of broken pottery. The smell of sickness surrounds him. He has spent entire chapters arguing with his friends, demanding explanations from God, raising his fist at the sky, and suddenly the horizon splits open. A whirlwind rises in the distance. The sand begins to spin. The wind roars against the rocks, and from the heart of that storm, a voice answers. God doesn't give Job the explanation he expected. Instead, he asks him questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Who shut up the sea with doors when it burst from its place? Have you entered the springs of the deep? Question after question, until Job falls silent. And then, near the end of that overwhelming speech, God mentions two beings that have baffled readers for thousands of years. The first is called Behemoth. Listen to how he introduces it. God says to Job, "Look now at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins, and his vigor in the muscles of his belly. His bones are like tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron." And then comes the line that changes everything. He moves his tail like a cedar. Stop there. A cedar. Do you know what a cedar of Lebanon is? A tree that can reach 40 meters tall, with a trunk as thick as a stone column. That's the image God chooses to describe the tail of this beast. And here, for centuries, a debate has raged that I want to present to you with total honesty, without selling you one single version as if it were the only one. Because there are serious people who love the Bible on both sides of this discussion. Most scholars identify Behemoth with the hippopotamus. Their argument has force. The hippo eats grass, lives among the water and the reeds, has a massive body and enormous musculature in the belly, dense bones. It fits much of the description. And the tail like a cedar. These scholars answer that it's poetic language, that the comparison isn't about the size of the tail, but about its rigidity, its firmness, the way it tenses with force, like a trunk that won't bend. Hebrew poetry, they say, compares qualities, not exact measurements. For them, Behemoth is a real, observable animal, shown to Job to remind him that he can't even master a beast of the river, much less demand an accounting from the Creator. But there's another reading, held above all by some creationists, and it deserves to be heard with respect. They ask, would God, wanting to impress Job with his masterpiece, really choose as his example an animal whose tail is 1/2 meter long and sways like a thin thread? The Hebrew word translated as tail, they say, means exactly that, tail, and nowhere in Scripture means anything else. And if the image is of something thick, powerful, moving like a cedar swaying in the wind, no living animal fits better than a dinosaur with a very long neck and tail. A sauropod, like the Brachiosaurus or the Diplodocus, whose tails stretched like living trunks, and as they moved, swept the air with a colossal weight. Which of the two readings is correct? The text doesn't say it with the clarity we'd all like. What isn't honest is what that other famous video does, mocking the hippopotamus as if the question were settled. It isn't. It's a legitimate open debate, and the greatness of the passage doesn't depend on winning the argument. It depends on something both sides acknowledge. Behemoth, whatever it is presented as one of the most imposing works of God, something before which the human being feels small and falls silent. And there's something I don't want you to miss, because it's the key to the whole scene. God isn't giving Job a zoology lesson. He's asking him a question without saying it out loud. If you can't even look straight at this work of my hands, if you tremble before a single one of the beings I formed, by what authority do you intend to demand an accounting from me who made it? The text says, Behemoth is the first of the ways of God, one of the earliest and greatest displays of his power. And even so, it's nothing more than a work, one among countless others. The one who shaped it is infinitely greater than it. That's the lesson that left speechless the man who had lost everything. And if you think Behemoth is impressive, wait, because what comes next is far worse. And this is where almost everyone gets it wrong. Before I show you why, subscribe to the channel. Do it now, because what you're about to discover about the second beast, and about the mistakes skeptics and enthusiasts make alike, completely changes the way you'll read the book of Job forever. Turn on the bell too, don't miss the rest, and let's return to the storm. After Behemoth, the voice from the whirlwind introduces a second being, and it devotes something astonishing to it, an entire chapter, more than 30 verses describing a single monster. Its name is Leviathan. Listen to the description because it's the stuff of nightmares. God asks Job, almost sarcastically, whether he could fish for Leviathan with a simple hook, whether he could put a cord on its tongue or pierce its jaw with a barb, the way it's done with any ordinary fish. The obvious answer is no, and then the text turns terrifying. It says that out of its mouth come torches of fire, that sparks leap from it, that from its nostrils pours smoke, like a pot boiling over the fire, that its breath kindles coals, that its heart is firm as a millstone, and that when it rises, even the bravest men tremble and draw back beside themselves with terror. A monster that breathes fire. Stop again, because here the two camps clash once more. Most biblical commentators interpret Leviathan in two ways. Some see it as a crocodile, the only living animal that comes close to that image of impossible jaws, armored skin, and total dominion of the water. Others, and they are many, understand it as a symbol of chaos, and this has a solid historical basis. In the cultures surrounding Israel, especially in the very ancient texts of the city of Ugarit, there existed a very similar serpentine monster, called Lotan, a twisting serpent with 7 heads, defeated by the gods of the Canaanite pantheon. The Leviathan of the Bible, these scholars say, takes that image known to everyone, but proclaims something different and revolutionary, that it isn't the pagan gods, but the one true God who rules the monster of chaos. The fire and the smoke in this reading are poetic language, the ancient way of painting a supernatural and terrifying being. There's even a beautiful detail, almost no one mentions. In one of the Psalms, that same Leviathan appears not as an enemy, but as a being God formed to play in the sea, like an enormous toy in the hands of the Creator, frolicking among the waves. That fits a symbol of God's power far better than a merely furious reptile. And on the other side, once again, are those who propose that Leviathan was a real marine reptile, now extinct. A mosasaur, a plesiosaur, one of those enormous beasts science has dug up from the bottom of ancient oceans. And the fire, they suggest it could have been an ancient way of describing something nobody understood. Steam, some form of light produced by the animal itself, or simply the sheer terror it caused, exaggerated by the horror of whoever saw it with their own eyes. And I'm not going to fake a certainty I don't have. No one can tell you for sure which of the two readings is correct, and be suspicious of anyone who does so without hesitating. What is true, and this no one disputes, is that the Bible describes beings that don't fit cleanly with any animal you'd see in a zoo today. Behemoth, with its tail like a cedar, Leviathan, the terror of the waters, and the tannin, the great monsters of creation. Whether real animals, memories of extinct beasts, or symbols of conquered chaos, one thing is certain: the total silence about the colossal was an illusion. The shadows were always there. And let me show you how far that thread runs, because it's longer than you imagine. That image of the sea monster, of the dragon only God can defeat, doesn't stay in the Old Testament. It runs through the whole Bible like an underground river. It appears under the name Rahab, the monster of pride that God pierced. It appears in the prophets as the fleeing serpent that will be punished at the end of time. And it reappears in the last book of Scripture, in Revelation, where the great dragon, the ancient serpent, is identified as none other than the devil. Do you see it? The monster of chaos that began thrashing in the waters of Job ends up being the symbol of evil itself, defeated forever. For the Bible, the dragon isn't a piece of zoology. It's a way of speaking about the oldest enemy and about a God able to crush it. But now the question grows bigger, because if the Bible holds echoes of enormous monsters, it isn't alone. And what you're about to discover connects the book of Job with almost every civilization that has ever existed on the face of the earth. There's a fact that still baffles historians and anthropologists. Almost every ancient culture in the world, separated by oceans, by deserts, by thousands of kilometers and whole centuries, speaks of the same thing: of dragons, of colossal serpents, of giant reptiles. In ancient Babylon there was Tiamat, the dragon of primordial chaos, from whom they said the world was born. In Egypt, Apophis, the enormous serpent that tried to devour the sun every night and had to be beaten back at dawn. In the Americas, the Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, half bird, half reptile, and the Maya worshipped its equivalent, Kukulkan. In medieval Europe, knights faced fire-breathing dragons, and the legend of St. George piercing the beast with his lance was told for centuries beside the fires. In the frozen north, the Vikings spoke of a serpent so immense it encircled the entire world, biting its own tail at the bottom of the ocean. And in that same Babylon, on the famous Ishtar Gate, that enormous entrance covered in blue glazed tiles, beside perfectly real lions and bulls, the artisans sculpted a beast called the Mushushu, a scaly body, a long neck, legs like a wild animal, the head of a horned serpent, and the list goes on, almost without end. The Greeks told of the dragon that guarded the golden fleece and the many-headed hydra whose heads grew back when cut. The Romans inherited their monstrous serpents. Peoples of Africa, of India, of the Pacific Islands all keep in their memory the great serpent, the scaly guardian, the lord of the deep waters. It isn't a handful of isolated cultures. It's practically all of humanity telling one and the same story with different accents. How is it possible? How did peoples who never knew one another invent, independently, the same kind of monster? Enormous reptiles, some with wings, some marine, some land-dwelling. This doesn't look like a coincidence. It looks like a pattern, and patterns almost always mean something. Here you have, once again, three possible paths. The first, that all those cultures, by pure chance, imagined the same beast. Unlikely, isn't it? The second, that there's an archetype in the human mind, a deep and shared fear that produces dragons everywhere. Possible, but it doesn't fully explain the concrete details. And the third, that they were describing something they saw, or that their ancestors saw, or evidence they found buried in the earth. And this third path has an academic name. It's called Geomythology, and it's a real, serious field of study, championed among others by the researcher Adrian Mayer. The idea is fascinating. Many ancient legends of monsters could have been born when human beings with no knowledge of paleontology stumbled upon gigantic bones jutting out of the rock and tried to explain what kind of beast had left such remains. I want you to imagine that scene. You're a shepherd 3,000 years ago. You walk across a parched hillside, leading your flock under a burning sun. Last night's rain has washed the soil of the hill, and suddenly, in the mud, something white emerges. You approach cautiously. It's a skull, but not like any you know. It's bigger than your own body. It has eye sockets where your whole head would fit, and teeth the size of your hand, curved and sharp. Your heart races. You know nothing of extinctions. You don't know that bone has lain millions of years underground. You only know one thing with absolute certainty. A monster lived here. And that night, beside the fire, your voice still trembling, you tell your children. They tell theirs. And generation after generation, the story grows, is adorned, transforms. It becomes legend. It becomes a dragon. That hypothesis explains a lot. It explains why dragons are almost always reptiles, why some fly, why others swim, why there are land-dwelling ones. Because fossils, too, are that varied, scattered across the whole Earth. But now comes the twist that other famous video would never tell you, because it ruins its perfect narrative, and I'd rather lose the easy applause than lie to you. There's a popular legend that the ancient Chinese found dinosaur bones and called them dragon bones, selling them in their traditional pharmacies. And it's true that in Chinese medicine, the so-called dragon bones were used. But when scientists studied what those bones really were, the answer was uncomfortable for the romantic version. The vast majority were not from dinosaurs. They were fossils of extinct mammals, mastodons, ancient rhinoceroses, prehistoric horses, and even remains of Gigantopithecus, the largest ape that ever existed. In fact, it was by tracing those dragon bones that researchers ended up discovering the famous Peking man, one of the most important finds about our own origins. And there's more. Several serious paleontologists have cast doubt on the idea that the Chinese dragon was born specifically from dinosaur bones. They point out that there's no evidence anyone in antiquity knew the real appearance of a dinosaur before complete skeletons were excavated and assembled in Europe in the 19th century. Even the most famous hypothesis of geomythology, the one connecting a certain legendary griffin to a small, horned dinosaur, was strongly challenged in recent studies. What does all this mean? That geomythology is a legitimate and fascinating field, and that it's very likely some monster legends were born from the discovery of ancient bones. That's reasonable and honest. But to claim that all the dragons of the world are memories of dinosaurs is to go too far. The truth, as almost always, is more nuanced and more interesting than the slogan. There's an echo of something real in those legends, only it isn't as clean or as direct as you were sold, and maybe there, in that memory shared by all of humanity, beats something deeper than a simple misread bone. Because notice what almost all those stories have in common. The dragon is almost never just an animal. It's a threat. It's the chaos lurking at the edge of the world, the darkness that must be faced, the monster that must be defeated so that life can go on. At the bottom of all those legends beats one and the same human intuition, the sense that the world is older, vaster, and more dangerous than we are, and that there's something we need to be rescued from. The Bible takes up that intuition and gives it an answer. It takes the dragon, the monster of chaos, and declares that it owns nothing, that above it there's a God who formed it, who subdues it, and who will one day defeat it forever. Where the other peoples saw a threat with no way out, Scripture sees an enemy already defeated. That's the difference, and it changes everything. And now, at last, we come to the theory that gives that famous video its name. The answer that they promise explains everything. It's time to look at it face to face. The theory is called, in English, the gap theory, or the ruin and reconstruction theory. And it works like this. Take the first 2 verses of the Bible. The first says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." The second says, "And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep." The defenders of this theory propose that between verse 1 and verse 2, an entire world fits, a gap of millions of years. They argue that God first created a perfect earth, inhabited, full of life, perhaps with dinosaurs included, that in that world Lucifer ruled before his fall, that when Lucifer rebelled, God judged that world and destroyed it completely. And that verse 2 describes the ruins of that catastrophe. Afterward, in the 6 days, God would not have created from scratch, but rebuilt the planet for humanity. The great reptiles, according to this idea, belong to the earlier world, and that's why Adam never saw them, and that's why Genesis doesn't mention them in the week of creation. It sounds orderly, it sounds tempting, and I understand why so many embrace it. The problem is that when you examine it closely, this idea collapses on at least 4 different sides. And this channel doesn't exist to repeat what sounds nice, but to get closer to what's real. For starters, it isn't the historic teaching of the church, but a fairly modern interpretation. It was popularized by a Scottish theologian, Thomas Chalmers, in the early 19th century, around the year 1814, and it spread across the world above all thanks to the notes of a very famous study Bible, the Schofield Bible. And here's the revealing fact. The declared motive for promoting it was to fit the long ages of geology into the text. It wasn't born from reading the Hebrew carefully, but from the attempt to cram the millions of years into a crack between 2 sentences. There's something even more uncomfortable. This theory isn't rejected by just one camp. It's discarded by traditional scholars and also, curiously, by a good part of the strictest creationists. They close the door on it from both sides, and its star argument, the linguistic one, falls apart the moment you look closely. They say the second verse shouldn't read that the earth was formless, but that it came to be, that it became a chaos, as if it narrated a later destruction. The detail is that the natural translation of the Hebrew verb is was. None of the great academic versions renders it as became. Building a whole world on the twisting of a single verb is building on sand. The final blow comes from an internal contradiction almost no one notices, and I want you to see it with me because it's elegant. That famous video tells you 2 things that can't both be true. On one hand, that Behemoth and Leviathan are living dinosaurs God shows to Job. On the other, that the dinosaurs died millions of years before Adam, in the destruction of Lucifer's world. Do you notice it? If the giants were already extinct before the first human being, God couldn't have been pointing Job to a living, present beast. The 2 ideas cancel each other out. The theory that promised to solve everything trips over its own logic. Even the texts used as proof don't say what's claimed. The pages that speak of Lucifer's fall in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, at first glance describe the fall of human kings, the king of Babylon and the king of Tyre, and scholars debate how far they also refer to Satan. But in none of them is there talk of an earlier creation of plants and animals, nor of a planet full of dinosaurs destroyed by a judgment. That's added from the outside. And there are those who also cite a passage from the prophet Jeremiah, where the prophet sees the earth formless and void, without light, without man, and they say it describes that lost world. But if you read the whole chapter, it's clear Jeremiah isn't looking toward the remote past. He's announcing the judgment coming upon his own nation, using the language of undone creation to describe a future catastrophe. It's exactly the opposite of what the theory needs. So, without beating around the bush, this is what I think of the theory. It's a legitimate interpretation that some Christians hold in good faith, and you have every right to explore it. But it isn't a proven fact, it isn't the consensus, and it certainly doesn't solve everything, as they promise. If someone presents it to you as the hidden truth the Bible deliberately concealed, they're selling you a certainty the text doesn't support. And before we go on, I want to be fair and show you that the disagreement doesn't end there, because there's another question beneath this one, even deeper. Imagine for a moment the Garden of Eden, a perfect garden at peace. And now ask yourself a question that has divided wise and sincere people for centuries. In that original world before sin entered, was there death? Because the text says that when creation was finished, God looked at everything he had made and saw that it was very good. Here again, the paths split, and both deserve respect. Some believers hold that there could be no death or suffering of any kind before the fall of the human being, not even among the animals, because a creation with predators tearing apart their prey wouldn't fit the words very good. For them, the enormous reptiles, if they existed, had to live in peace with everything else, and violence came only afterward. Other believers, just as serious, answer that the death of animals was never the problem, that the thorn, the fang, and the claw are part of the design of a living world, and that what changed with the fall was the relationship of the human being with God, not the cycle of nature. Who's right? I'm not going to give you a pocket-sized answer, because there isn't one. I show you the question so you understand something crucial. When someone tells you there's a single obvious explanation for the dinosaurs in the Bible, they're hiding from you how enormous and how honest this debate really is. And there are even those who ask, with full logic, whether those colossal beasts would have fit on Noah's Ark. Some answer yes, that young, small ones would fit. Others say they had gone extinct long before. One more question, one more door the text leaves unclosed, which leaves us exactly where it has to leave us, with an enormous question, still without a clear answer. If the missing word doesn't fully explain it, if Behemoth and Leviathan are an open debate, if the dragons are only a distant echo, and if the gap theory doesn't hold up, then why? Why does the Bible keep silent about the most impressive beings that ever walked this world? And here, after discarding the false and the exaggerated, let me take you to one last scene. But this time not to antiquity. Imagine a child today, holding his mother's hand, walking into the great hall of a museum. Before him rises a mounted skeleton that nearly grazes the ceiling, ribs like steel beams, an enormous head suspended high above, its mouth open. The child tilts his head back to take it all in and feels something he can't yet name. How small he is, how brief he is. That night at home, he opens the Bible they gave him, turns the pages one by one, searches and searches again, and doesn't find that giant anywhere. And then, with that clean honesty only children have, he looks up at his mother and asks, "If God made everything, why isn't this in his book?" That question, the child's before the skeleton, is exactly the same one that opened this video, and it deserves an answer that isn't a magic trick. So we arrive at last at the most honest answer, and believe me, the most beautiful of all. The Bible isn't a book of geology. It isn't a manual of paleontology. It wasn't written to tell you when the first form of life appeared or how much the last of the giants weighed. If you open Genesis expecting a catalogue of nature, you'll come away frustrated because that was never its purpose. From beginning to end, Scripture has a single great focus, a single story running through it all. The relationship between God and the human being, how we were created, how evil entered the world, how God, again and again, reached out his hand to rescue us. It's the story of a redemption. And the great reptiles simply are not part of that story. Think of it this way: when a father writes a letter to his son to tell him how much he loves him and what plans he has for him, he doesn't include in that letter the periodic table of the elements. Not because chemistry is false, but because it isn't the point. The letter's silence about atoms isn't a lie or a cover-up. It's focus, it's love, concentrated on what truly matters. That's Genesis. The silence about the giants isn't a suspicious crack to be patched up with clever theories. It's the proof that the text knows exactly what it wants to talk to you about, and it doesn't want to talk to you about extinct beasts. It wants to talk to you about you. And let me tell you why this matters so much beyond simple curiosity. Every time someone forces the Bible to answer a question it never wanted to answer, every time they turn it into a scientific manual that has to explain everything, they actually weaken it. They tie it to the fashionable theories of each era. And the day that theory changes, it seems the whole faith collapses with it. By contrast, when you understand that Genesis doesn't compete with paleontology, but speaks of something else, of something no microscope and no fossil will ever measure, then nothing the scientists discover can pull the floor out from under you. They can find 1,000 new skeletons tomorrow. They can correct the dates, redraw the trees of life, rewrite the manuals entirely. And the question of the heart will remain intact. Who are you? And why are you here? That's the question of Genesis. And to that one, science, for all its greatness, has no answer. And notice something that science and faith, far from fighting, can marvel at together. Science tells us that for 165 million years, those colossi dominated the planet. They reigned, they roared, they hunted, they nested. They were the absolute lords of the earth, generation after generation, for a span of time so vast your mind can barely hold it. And then, according to the data, around 66 million years ago, it all ended in an instant. Imagine that day. A point of light in the sky, growing. A rock from space, wider than a city, crossing the atmosphere at an impossible speed. The impact raises a wall of fire, darkens the sun with ash for years, freezes and burns the world at once. And when the dust finally settles, the giants are gone. All of them, without a single exception. And then, silence. A silence that didn't last a day or a century. The earth remained empty of giants for tens of millions of years. The world kept turning, the continents drifted slowly, new animals appeared, whole forests grew over the buried bones of the ancient kings. And in all that immense time, impossible to grasp, no one lifted their eyes to the sky to wonder where they came from. No one buried their dead with hope. No one wrote a poem, or spoke a prayer, or loved another knowing they loved them. The planet was beautiful and completely mute inside. 165 million years of dominion, and today only bones remain in lit display cases. They left billions of fossils scattered across the whole world, but they left not a single written word. They left no story told by themselves. They left no love, no hope, no memory of who they were, because they weren't made for that. And then you appeared, not to reign for millions of years, for something infinitely greater, because there's a single being in all the history of this planet of whom the sacred text says it was made in the image of God. Not the Tyrannosaur, not the Leviathan, not the dragon of any legend. You, In the first chapter of Genesis, in verse 27, it's written that God created the human being in His image, male and female, He created them. Do you know what that means? It means you can know God, that you can love Him, that you can have a real relationship with your Creator, something none of those colossi ever had, however imposing their size. The largest reptile that ever existed couldn't lift its eyes to the sky and recognize the one who made it. You can. Think about it. All the strength of the Tyrannosaur wasn't enough for a single prayer. All the immensity of Argentinosaurus wasn't enough for one instant of gratitude. They could make the earth tremble, but they couldn't whisper a name toward the sky. And you, who perhaps feel weak, small, almost invisible before the gigantic history of the universe, carry inside you something no colossus ever had. A soul able to seek its Creator, to speak to Him, to argue with Him as Job did from his heap of ashes, and to be heard. That's no small thing. That changes absolutely everything. And here is the heart of all this, what I really wanted to tell you from the beginning. Maybe you came to this video looking for a curiosity, an odd fact about ancient bones. But the real question was never about the dinosaurs. The real question is about your worth. Because if God sustained the existence of every living being through countless ages, if He knows every bone buried beneath kilometers of rock, if nothing in this universe escapes His gaze, do you really believe He would forget you? In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said it with a tenderness that breaks the soul. He said that not a single sparrow falls to the ground without the Father knowing it, and that even the hairs of your head are all numbered one by one. And then He added, "Do not be afraid, for you are worth more than many sparrows." Those giants had their time, 165 million years, and it ended. Their story ended in silence, in dust, in cold stone. But yours doesn't have to end that way. Because there's a promise no dinosaur received, a door no beast could cross. In the Gospel of John is the most famous line in all the Bible. For God so loved the world that He gave His Son, so that whoever believes in Him would not perish, but have eternal life. Whoever believes, that includes you. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how many times you've stumbled or how far you think you've strayed. The invitation is still open, and it's still for you. If something in this is touching a nerve inside you right now, let me ask you one single thing, and it comes from the heart. Write one word in the comments. Eternal. Just that. Let it be your way of saying you understood that your story doesn't fade out like the giants, that you were made for something that doesn't end. Because in the end, this is the truth the silence of Genesis was quietly telling us all along. The Bible doesn't mention the dinosaurs, not because it hid them, but because its story never revolved around them. It revolved around a single being made in the image of its Creator. It revolved around you. Think about that tonight when you turn off the screen. You share the planet with the ghosts of a fallen empire. You walk, literally, over the cemetery of the most powerful creatures that ever existed. And yet you have something all of them together in 165 million years never had. The ability to know God, to be loved by Him, and to love Him back. You're not worth less for having come later. You're worth more because you came to stay. The giants fell, and the dust covered their bones. The sky kept silent over them for 66 million years. But over you, over your name, over every tear you've cried in secret, that same sky has never stopped speaking, not for a single instant. And if you made it this far, if for a moment you felt at once smaller before the universe and more loved than you believed, don't turn it off yet. That same thread, the one about your place in this immense story, continues right in the video now appearing on the screen. I left it waiting for you, because it picks up exactly where this ends and takes you one step deeper. Click it before it slips away, because what you discovered today only opened the door.